this whole like, I am a planner, I will give you a comprehensive financial plan. That is not an immediate value to a lot of folks.
You wanna grow and go and get there, sometimes upward, sometimes nowhere. You've got the ideas, you're looking up at the clouds, but how do you start standing out of the crowd? So build it with us from the ground up.
Hey everybody, welcome to From the Ground Up. I'm Zach Conway. I'm here with Kelsey McKenna. Kelsey, I had an interesting conversation yesterday that made me think of something we could kind of have a conversation about today. It was with somebody that has a pretty cool background of helping to build startups, actually. And we were having a conversation about what we're doing at Seeds. And obviously at Seeds, we're building something that hopefully is helping financial advisors. And really late into the conversation, I asked him, hey, by the way, do you have a financial advisor? Do you use one? Right? You're kind of interested in this thing that we're building at Seeds, and you may want to be involved in it in some way. Like, do you actually use the user of our technology? And he said, no, I don't. And this is somebody probably with a decent amount of money and a decent amount of sort of wealth complexity. So I asked him, okay, well, why? What's the reason that you haven't hired a human person to kind of help you with all this stuff that seems to be, complicated enough in your life that maybe it'd be worth getting help? And he went on to talk about how he can kind of get his own quote unquote alpha in his portfolio because he invests in private companies, and he does that to kind of get an edge in the market. And then an advisor, like, they would just do sort of that passive investing thing, and so I can just do that myself and invest in Apple and some stock tickers and kind of call it a day. And it was kind of like one of those. It was a moment that honestly I'm used to experiencing, but it's still a gut punch at the same time, where this person that is interested in a startup that's selling into wealth management perceives wealth management that way, right? That's what they think the value is. And so it just, again, I wanted to kind of talk through it with you and workshop, like, why is this still such a problem? And maybe how can advisors really focus on fixing it for themselves and their own businesses? It's an industry-wide problem, but how do you kind of bring it back to your own company and tell a better story? And we can kind of juxtapose that with, our own business, Seeds, and how we think about making value clear and how the consumer perceives value, and how do you kind of connect those things. So let's do that. So let's go back to, before we solve the financial advisor's problem, how is Seeds in your mind kind of thinking through the value proposition story, right? How do we, Seeds, define it, and how we sort of are iterating on it now over time as a startup?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have the same exact reputation. We don't have the same reputation struggles, which I'm sure we'll get into in terms of like the financial advisory space, because advisor tech, like the industry itself, I don't think is plagued by those exact same issues. But you do see in the advisor tech space a lot of similar messaging. You see a lot of similar value props. So there is some overlap in kind of the struggles with trying to differentiate and trying to tell a different story and communicate value that really resonates and doesn't just feel like fluff or like impersonal or not exactly like hitting the nail on the head. I think we're in a really interesting spot right now to be having this conversation with where we're at Seeds, just because we are an early stage startup, and we're at that moment of having gone through our first few rounds of like early adopters. And so, as we've talked about in previous episodes, I really believe that you just have to put something out there at the beginning, like aim at something and get those first customers to more deeply understand who they are, what they struggle with, what their pain points are, what they find valuable in your offering and your solution. And so we're right at that like moment where we're actually going back and looking at our messaging and looking at our website and our brand and all of that stuff, how we position our various like features and benefits. We're in that moment because we did just talk to, I'm sure customer wise, I've talked to like 70 firms or something in the last like 6 months, and really been trying to understand what do you like, what don't you like, what does provide value, what doesn't, and what is that value, and what's the pain point associated with it. So we're now right at that moment. So I think it's an interesting time to be talking about this, because it's exactly what I recommend to firms who are in that early stage too, of like those first few customers, you're trying to figure out who they are and what's consistent. What is that pain very, very specifically? What's their outcome that they're seeking in working with you? So yeah, I think we're in a really interesting moment to be talking about this for sure.
I think one of the parallels, in what we're building as a technology platform and, how advisors serve clients is that we would say, I think both of us would say the value is sort of broad, meaning there are components of value delivery across a few different areas in Seed's case to a financial advisory business, and then in the advisor's case in the lives of their clients.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a double-edged sword, right? That's a blessing and a curse, because in building a new piece of technology, that's kind of hard to bucket exactly where it fits on the Kitsy's map, for example, of, this is
Mm-hmm.
what you do. It's sort of clear, narrow, deep, super specific pain point. That's all you solve. We have this sort of broader scope, combination of things that we're trying to fix, all in the context for Seeds of, what we sort of call the investing journey between the advisor and the client. But there's a lot of different things we're trying to fix in what we're delivering. So again, it's a good thing and a bad thing, right? Because it's a lot to cover in like a quick lead headline on the homepage of your website, where it's clear, hey, we're doing this, but we're also doing this, and this across that whole journey. And again, same arguably true for advisors. If you're running sort of a holistic financial planning business, there are a lot of sort of like sub-services within that idea that you're delivering to the end client. And
Mm-hmm.
I think when it gets, for Seeds, because it's broad, it's harder to articulate, it's harder to sort of value match the pain to the problem, and that subset of problems. And same for the advisor. One of the things, and we can kind of go more into that, but one of the things that I think is different, and you touched on it a second ago, we have the benefit of being brand new, meaning
Mm-hmm.
there is less of a perception, a negative perception, or a misunderstanding or misperception of what we do that we have to contend with in the way that financial advisors tend to, right? The guy I'm describing, this is a really smart dude. Financial advice has been around for, holistic planning has been around for 50 plus years. And his perception of the value is maybe that human person can like get me some better returns in a portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing else. None of the other services, all those sub services are like not even on his radar. That's really hard. That's a really hard baseline to contend with, right? So like we Seeds can iterate, reshape the messaging, whatever, but we're not fighting against wealth tech and investing as an experience, and our positioning, somebody saying, oh, I already know what that is,
Yeah.
incorrectly, versus, oh, financial advisor, yeah, I don't need that.
Yeah.
So it is kind of the bigger challenge, I'd say.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's so much there. I do think like something that's core to this whole discussion that I think gets overlooked, especially when you're talking about like marketing and positioning and like pricing, is just like a customer orientation or like a customer centricity in even thinking through this whole strategy. I feel like a lot of times um, folks are looking, and this doesn't just apply to advisors, but you're looking kind of inward out from the organization and saying like, we understand the benefits of what we do to be these things, and therefore we're going to put that on our website, and therefore we're going to say it to prospects or whoever, right? We believe this. And it's so important to think through, like in the example you're giving, to really try to separate yourself from your deep knowledge and understanding of your services and the value they can provide if you get someone in the door and get their trust, build trust with them and they become a customer. You have to really like step back and orient yourself in all of those like judgment, perceptions, concerns, all of the things that go along with whatever the initial problem or pain point is that may be driving them to seek an advisor. So being real about what that problem actually is and really actually listening to your customers and not assuming they have a problem, they're aware of a problem that they're not aware of, I think is a big deal. So like, and we've run into this at Seeds, like you can think there's a problem for your customer that they don't know they have. So if someone is getting in the room with you, there's a reason. There's something that triggered that. You don't get to tell them what that is. They tell you what that is. And that's kind of the beginning. But from there, really trying to understand everything else going on. So that pain point, okay, you resolving that pain point or that problem for you, that's a big deal. It caused you to even meet with me. But what else is going through your head so that throughout that whole process, and even on your website and in your marketing materials, as you learn more and more about your ideal client, you can then speak to that very, very clearly. And it's a really tough process. It's not easy. I'm not going to act like it's easy. It's been really hard for us. It's hard for advisors, especially since there's a lot of similar language and there's a certain way of doing things that, historically has been successful. So there's so much there, but I think just orienting yourself in the mind of the customer and trying to stay away from the internal perception of all of the services and benefits you can provide is really important. It's like a first step, basically.
Yeah, we want to, I know as an industry, as financial advisors, you have this sort of underlying frustration because we all know that the market generally misunderstands our value. But then that frustration just sort of like boils up into, but I do this, but I do this, but I do this. Let me add more services. Let me add more services. And we don't actually attack, that's not the right word, that we don't actually address or have a conversation about what those misperceptions are when they walk in our door. And the sort of like sneaky way to get to them, to your point, is let them, if you've gotten somebody in the room, let them express their pain, whatever the pain is, right? If they're there, why did they walk in the room? And we've had episodes about this, right? Specifically what that meeting should look like. And we think a lot about it, like in our sales meetings with Seeds. Why are we here? You tell us, why'd you book this meeting? Because that's a jumping off point on the Seed side for us of, okay, what misconception do they have about what our value prop is and what our services are? And it may even tell us like, hey, they saw something on our website that we need to rewrite, or they heard me say something in a webinar that maybe is not exactly the right way to frame it. It's such valuable information to both like shape, again, to iterate like how you talk about the value, but also it's like an anchor point to then say, like what you're saying, okay, maybe, so if I can't fix that, let me make it clear what I actually can do, or I can fix that, but have you thought about this, and this that is sort of tangential or connected to that initial point of pain, if you will. But you have to let them express that initially, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what that actually is, and you can kind of build from there. And yeah, same for advisors, right? Like, why are they in the room? Let them talk, and then you can kind of shape the story and subsequent pain around what they're expressing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think like there's two things that are coming up for me. One is like I really recommend, and this is an approach I take, as you've probably noticed in our conversations with advisors, but I really believe if you're getting the sense that there is something there is a concern or something unexpressed, really just trying to I don't want to use the word attack, but address, like you said, address that head on in the room, I think is very valuable. It feels like a risk to be like, so for example, maybe they've had a financial advisor in the past that, wasn't great. And they felt like they were taken advantage of. They felt like they were paying for something. They were overpaying for something and they weren't getting the value out of that. They might not come in your door and say that necessarily, but you can kind of address it without addressing it if you're getting that sense of kind of tension in that area by saying, look, I know there are a lot of financial advisors out there. They all do things differently. And I also know that historically there are advisors out there who aren't fiduciaries. They don't operate in this way. I just want you to know, like, I'm not one of those people. Like just straight up saying it. Like I'm not that.
Yeah.
This is how I'm different. And then following up with exactly how you're not that. It doesn't hurt because it's something that can really just very clearly show, hey, I get you. I get that it's hard to take this, like to make this leap with me, especially when it relates to finances. And, this is a big box of services that you don't understand necessarily that I'm trying to like sell you. So just like getting that out in the open, I think can really help. The other thing that has come up in some of our episodes that's like such a core value for me that I just love when some of our guests have brought it up is like, be real, like be authentic. And if you authentically care about your customers and you really want what's best for them, and you, even if it's not you, even if it's not your service, if it's not being your customer, that will shine through if you show up and you are genuine and honest with them. And I think that that can go such a long way. And it can come through in your marketing too. It can come through on your website. Like if you authentically care about people, they're going to feel that. And so it's not a tactic, really. But I do think advisors are always looking for like, what's a growth tactic? What's a, and it really is like a very simple first thing, first step.
Yeah.
Like genuinely caring about your customers. Here at Seeds, we're constantly talking about, you're an advisor by background. My dad was an advisor. Your dad was an advisor or is an advisor. Like we care about advisors. But you have to continue to like prioritize them throughout your decision making throughout as your business grows, because it's so easy to lose touch with that. Like, I don't want to say human because we keep talking about human first, but with that connection to the customer and that genuine care. It's not that you stop caring about them. It's just that the distance grows and you get distracted, and just really being there and showing up and being present and respecting them, I think goes a really long way.
That human, I'll use it again, that human experience stuff, that just human emotional stuff, can close the gap where there isn't clarity on tangible value delivery. That doesn't fix it, but it definitely, can help bridge the gap a bit. So if you can do both, right? If you can really convey the, hey, okay, I'm hearing some points of pain and I am going to solve that. It may not be super clear to you how and the exact benefit of it just yet, but if you feel like I hear you, I got you, we're going to work on this, that can make up for the lack of clarity on exactly the sort of quantified value of it. And so let's maybe go there. I think like, again, advisors are fighting the misconception broadly across the industry. So it's like you almost have to assume when someone walks in their door, more often than not, there's at least a somewhat of a misunderstanding of what you do, right? What you perceive your value to be to the customer, they don't understand. And I do think where advisors struggle is because our services are so vast and the outcome can feel sort of amorphous. Like, we talk about this idea of we're going to give you peace of mind. We're going to ensure your quote unquote financial security.
Right.
You're going to be happier as a family, whatever. That all sounds really, really nice and hopefully aspirational. It's what we all want. But like, tell me how exactly. And what does that actually mean? What does that look like? And how does my pain connected to your services lead to those sort of broad conceptual outcomes? And so I think that's a takeaway for firms, right? How do you really better dot connect of this is an issue, here's how I solve it, here's why it's worth paying me for it. Like this is the more tangible, quantifiable value. We could spend a whole episode, so we maybe won't get too far into like pricing models are such a big deal in this regard. And especially where if you're charging on AUM, I'll just touch on it for a second. There's an immediate connection. What that does to your customers, say, okay, if you're charging me that way, then I'm only going to attach value to that thing. And that's one of the things in our wealth business we struggled with so much of, I am doing so much stuff. I'm helping you with financial issues and non-financial issues. In our wealth business, it's like the family therapists, nutritionists, we're making sure you're going on vacation. We're actually showing you the quantifiable progress you're making in those parts of your life. But at the end of the day, if you're charging 1% or whatever you're charging on assets to get compensated, people emotionally connect that expense to the value associated with where it's being charged, which is the portfolio.
Well,
So
and that
then they want to see
continues to go up over time. Like the other issues. So I was actually the other day reading a bunch of Reddit threads, which was fun to
whoa,
see.
rabbit hole.
I know it was a rabbit hole because I'm trying to better understand the end investor because our business sits in the middle of these problems, right? Because advisors want to
Yeah.
grow, they want to use us to help scale their business. But if they can't land new customers, it's really hard to deliver value on our side if you're through a current customer transition, basically. So say you finish that, we're sitting here waiting for your next customer so we can help you out, help you close that new client. If you can't even get in the room with someone, it's really hard to help you do that, right? So I was doing all this research and just like reading what people are saying on these threads, and consistently these end investors are like, I feel like I'm getting taken advantage of. I want a second. Like, can someone just like chime in here? This is what I'm paying. This is how much I have in my portfolio. It's gone up this much. I don't feel like my services have changed. I'm now paying $4,000 more a year. And I feel like I just have a planning check-in once a year and I can call them with questions about my portfolio. But is that really worth this additional fee? So I think there's a lot there that advisors are trying to contend with if you are running an AUM model, because you already have trust issues, like especially from younger generations who feel that they can Google things or they can kind of work around the system or find a coach or whatever. But then on top of it, it's like your services, like if you're not clearly communicating how as complexity goes up and as your dollars in portfolio go up, you have additional needs, then what you're saying is, hey, you're going to forever pay me more basically every year as long as I'm doing my job. And then what? I'm going to continue to do what I've been doing this whole time. So I do think that it's like mentally, it makes sense. It's not just that the transaction happens at the portfolio. It's also that, hey, I'm out paying you more and more and more and more. It'd be like if like you're paying your Netflix subscription and they're just like, okay, well, forever, we're just going to charge you more, but the same amount of movies and
Yeah.
shows and whatever,
The more you binge.
Yeah, I still love it. I still love Netflix, but I'm kind of like, whoa, this feels off. You know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
of course, advisors are going to say, well, if you have more, that's because of me. But when you think of stuff like inheritance or like something tied to their working situation, like that's not your portfolio management that did that. So I think there's a lot there that advisors are having to contend with. And it's why it's so important to be so clear on those services and to package them appropriately and not just like generically say, I do tax planning, or generically say, I do comprehensive financial planning. Because like that doesn't mean very much to someone who doesn't know anything about those things.
There's a company I won't name. It's because you hit on something that made me think of. They have a lot of commercials, and they always, their positioning is, we are fiduciaries.
Yeah.
Unlike all the other ones, we are fiduciaries, which is bullshit because
I hate
there's
that
an entire
marketing.
industry. There's an entire industry that's required to be fiduciaries. And so there's that layer, like, oh, we're different because they're gonna, make
Take
money on
advantage of you.
commissions.
Yeah.
Right. And we're not. But so there's that problem, which is a whole industry problem. And again, adds confusion to the end consumer and so on. But then the second layer underneath their marketing is, the reason we charge our 1% on the AUM is because that means our incentives are aligned. If we make you more money in the portfolio, isn't that good for you? And shouldn't we win as well? And that's, I think, what the end consumer also perceives is the value attached to that AUM percentage. You're going to get me a better return that I couldn't get on my own. And like, if this is your first episode listening to this podcast, the topic of everything we talk about is, that's not a thing. Advisors' value proposition is not about beating the market, right? Because we can't. It's empirically true. There's a very, very tiny, small subset of active management that can do it and has done it consistently over years. But statistically, that's more of a coincidence than anything else. So anyway, I could rant about that for hours. My point is, that's what the end consumer is being taught to perceive of why we're connecting that AUM figure, that percentage, those basis points to the AUM, as opposed to what we do believe is quantifiable, measurable value around all the other stuff related to investment management, which is, and this is an area that in and of itself is hard to quantify, but behavioral management. And there's the Vanguard Advisor Alpha study that a lot of people refer to of, hey, if you actually do this on your own, 1%, well, don't worry about 1%. You're going to lose multiple percentage points year after year because you're making the wrong market decisions and trying to market time and so on. Advisors can stop you from that. But even beyond that, so if that's not enough, things like asset allocation. Are you actually in a portfolio? Everybody just says, yeah, throw your money in a whatever ETF. Okay. But how do you dot connect that to your short and long term goals? Where are you withdrawing money out of over time to pay for those goals? Where are you locating certain asset classes so it's most efficient from a tax perspective? Are you tax loss harvesting over time? Are you rebalancing in an optimized way so that you're not hurting that risk adjusted return over the next 30, 40, 50 years in your portfolio? There's so many things that actually are measurable and quantifiable that you can show to the end client and say, listen, if you want to figure out how to do all of that and systematize it on your own, awesome. Go
Mhm.
do it. Right.
Yeah.
And you can do it, but here's how it is literally worth it if we do it for you. And oh, by the way, I know that you're whatever else you're trying to accomplish in your life, financially and non-financially, here are all these other ancillary services that we're providing for that cost as well. So, but that's a lot. That's
Yeah.
hard for advisors to kind of sit down and build out that story.
One thing I think we need to add here, because
Mm.
I see this all the time, and I actually have heard it from friends and even folks who work here. But this whole like, I am a planner, I will give you a comprehensive financial plan. That is not an immediate value to a lot of folks. That is 40, 30, 40 years down the line that some of this stuff is going to actually be necessary. So you showing me that you can help me make decisions now for that future is fine, but that's a moment in time thing. That's not a service necessarily. That's I assessed you, here is what I think based on what I know, but we all know that's going to change. So being really
You,
crystal clear on what is the ongoing services. And I've seen some really cool stuff. I've seen some advisors who are like, you can call us as many times as you want. You can call me anytime. You can check. We're going to have a monthly check in. We're going to have a monthly customer like joint session that you can join and ask your questions. Like just showing those things that are repetitive that you would be willing to pay over and over for is so important, because that long term, it's really hard to justify, oh, I'm going to look at 40 years down the road and make some assumptions and give you a couple things to do right now. And then we're just going to keep like touching on that once a year. That's really difficult, I think, to communicate value around, because I actually don't think, and I don't want to, you're going to hate me for saying this, but I don't think the value is really there if you're charging a 1% AUM fee for a big client, if that's all you're doing.
I no, I agree, and I think the amount of times I see advisors talk about their value around comprehensive planning
Comprehensive financial planning.
is so much more about them
Yeah. It's like
than it is
their
about the
stuff.
client.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Like, what
my
does that mean?
financial plans, you know, other advisors don't know when to do Roth conversions, and we do this, and it's a 50-page comprehensive plan, and it's going to be
Yeah.
gorgeous, and it's multifaceted, and here's how the math works, and every technique under the sun is perfectly dialed and whatever. Nobody gives a shit.
Hmm.
Nobody cares.
Hmm.
Nobody cares in that initial moment of when they
Yeah.
walked in their
They
door.
care
They're not
once they're in
saying
it with you. They may care to hear that.
exactly. Exactly. So like it's an ego check thing. Like that's great. You're an incredible financial advisor that knows all of the techniques. Don't stub your toe. Like don't that's important, but exactly what you said, you need to work your way into that by understanding why they're in the door in the first place. It could be because They just got an windfall of money. They're changing their job. They don't know what to do, and they're deciding if they're going to have a kid. Whatever the like entry point is, the response should be not be, okay, good news. You're going to get a 50-page comprehensive financial plan next
Get
week, and
ready.
we're going to go through it. And you're going to be so impressed about how smart I
And it's
am.
going to take me 2 hours to gather all the data points from you to be
I'm going to
able to
take you
calculate this.
through a 7-day discovery process to present that to you. They don't care. They don't care. They want the immediate problem addressed.
Yeah.
Again, it's not to say all that stuff is unimportant. You're ultimately going to get to all of that, but that's a mismatch of core problem, help me,
And first
to
win.
chest beating, here's how good I am at financial planning. They don't care yet.
Yeah.
You have to glide path into that.
And the other thing that's so interesting is a lot of firms are doing a lot of stuff that they don't like productize. And like, so what I just mentioned, like, I'm available to you between 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, or even Saturday sometimes, and even Sunday sometimes. We know how this goes. My dad was an advisor. We were like camping in the wilderness, and he was on client calls because the market was doing something crazy. Like, I'm available to you. I give you my cell phone number. You will have my cell phone number. Like stuff like that, it goes a long way, because if you're someone who's not like me or you don't have a dad who is a financial advisor, you're not trained in this industry, you don't know anything, you don't have anyone to call. So sometimes just that alone, just coming out and saying, hey, part of the service that I provide you is I am there for you. And I will answer your questions when you have them. And I will make sure that you're make sure that you have like a knowledgeable resource available to you, or my team, or whatever, right? Like really simple stuff that advisors are already doing. They just don't see it. They see it as like the service side of their core product versus part of the product itself. And I think some of the best websites I've seen, and you know me, I'm really just like, I just want there to be some innovation in this industry in terms of pricing and packaging and like how these services are messaged and delivered. I feel it's like we're right there. But I've seen some really great websites that just are straight up. Like they're just like, yeah, like I was just looking at one this morning that was like, you should not have to wait on hold to talk to somebody about your financial situation. You should have access, And I was like, huh, that resonates. Like I don't even have a problem right now, but that's at least valuable to me. That's like I would pay yearly to have that access. It's like simple stuff. But instead everyone's like, I'm a fiduciary. I do comprehensive planning. And it's like, okay, kind of table stakes at this point. Like, yeah, of course, I would hope so. That's like a sub bullet of the primary, the primary offering. Now I'm getting all excited
Another
about
part.
it.
It's good. Another part, and we should link to our episode with Guillaume on who do you actually serve. So having a niche where the problem set is more consistent.
Yeah, narrow.
It makes you and narrow, right? So I do think that's something to be thinking about. But again, assess how would you actually articulate to yourself what your tangible, quantifiable value is across your services, subset of services. What actually resonates to yourself, what doesn't? How do you tweak the language? How do you make it clearer in what the value is? So that's maybe step one. Step two is make sure that you're actually letting them articulate their pain, not puking value at them in the first meeting and talking about how smart you are as a financial advisor and how long the comprehensive financial plan is. Let them talk. It will help you sort of calibrate how you talk about your value and where to start, how to glide path into, whatever other services you can provide. Last thing I'll say on that is we're talking about that in the context of winning the business and starting the relationship. But so many advisors have clients where that wasn't clear on day one.
Yeah.
And you kick this can down the road of this tension. We're actually going to have a webinar today sort of on this topic with Brian Portnoy of Shaping Wealth. If you aren't clear on what you're delivering and what the value is and what that tangible output looks like, you may win the business for whatever reason. And maybe that's sort of like, hey, they like you, they trust you enough is starts the relationship. But there's always that tension that then forever. If it's never really clearly aligned, you're paying me to do these specific things, not this, right? It's not about alpha in the portfolio. It's not about this thing. It's not about this thing. This is what you're paying me to do. And if that's a mismatch, cool, let's talk about that. But it's not, so walking into review meetings with clients that you've had a relationship with for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and there's still that weird unspoken mismatch thing. We see that in businesses all the time. It's so common. So anyway, like, make that investment, I guess, is the point. Fix it at the front end, because A, obviously you want to win the business. B, you want those relationships after you win it to be clear, right? This is what we're doing. This is what it costs. And hopefully it's clear that it's valuable to you. Seeds, it's really where we're going again, sort of the meta thing of, as a business, we're realizing, how can we as a platform for advisors really help them quantify the value around investing specifically? And you use the phrase hearts and minds. It's ultimately about, can you win their hearts part of the equation, meaning people want to feel heard and understood. They want to know that you know them deeply, and that their portfolio and how you talk about investing is going to be shaped around that. That feels good. That's worth something. But the minds part is, you can also prove out why you're worth that fee in terms of actual investment management and implementation, relative to you trying to go off and do it on your own. So imagine if you can convey that on top of all the other services that you're clearly articulating why they're valuable around quote unquote comprehensive planning. You want it to be like, not a tension of, are they sort of worth this fee? Maybe, maybe not. I'm constantly questioning it. You want it to be so clear that not only is it worth it, it's like really worth it.
Yeah.
It more than sort of pays for itself. So that's what we're trying to do. So as we said earlier, tell us your feedback, because we're, constantly thinking through the messaging. If you haven't come to check out Seeds, please do so. We're at www.seedsinvestor.com. Follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on X, and we'll see you next time.